Hey guys, it's Miss Horton. I want to go back and look at artificial and natural selection with you. This is standard L82B. We're going to start with looking at natural selection. So when we're looking at something that's natural, you can think of the word natural by seeing nature. Natural selection came about by Charles Darwin, and we talked a little bit about him when we looked at natural selection the first time. He is known for his work in natural selection. He spent 5 years doing research on a ship called the HMS Beagle. And after he did his work, he wrote a book by the title of On the Origin of Species. And when he wrote that book, it was very controversial. A lot of people did not agree with what he said when he did his research and when he did all of his findings and wrote his book. One of the things that we look at in natural selection is adaptation. And this is when an animal or a plant develops a body part or a feature or a specific behavior that's going to help them survive and function in their natural environment. This actually happens through natural selection. In my classroom at North Pontotoc, we had several different animals, and we could look at ways that they could adapt to their surroundings. If the bearded dragon was actually in its natural habitat, the spikes that it has around its face and along its side would be used to protect it. It's actually an intimidation more than it is a protectant. The spikes aren't as pokey as they look. It's more to scare things off. And another way that the bearded dragon can use its body to protect itself is if it really wants to warn something, it will flare up its chin. The bottom of its chin turns black and it puffs up really big, and that lets whatever is coming at it know that it needs to back off. Another animal that we had in my classroom was the leopard gecko, and an adaptation that the leopard gecko has is that it can drop its tail. And when we left for spring break, our leopard gecko actually had her tail, and as you can see by the pictures, she had to drop it. When we brought her home during the corona pandemic, one of our cats got into the cage, and we came across the fact that the tail was detached from the leopard gecko. When she first lost her tail, it was a lot shorter than it is now. She's actually growing it back. So that's another adaptation that leopard geckos have, is even though they lose their tail, they do have the ability to grow them back. When they have their tail becomes very big. It's where they store excess fat. And that's a way that if they come into a time where they don't have enough food to survive, they can store up extra fat in their tail to help them survive through times like that. When we're looking at natural selection, there's two things that we need to consider. The first thing that we need to look at is the organism that we're focusing on. We just looked at a bearded dragon, and we also looked at the leopard gecko. Those are our organisms. It's the individual animal, plant, or it could even be a single-celled life form that you're studying during that time. Then you look at the environment. For the bearded dragon, the natural habitat would be a desert environment. We're going to look at Charles Darwin and his studies. And when he did his studies, the organism that he looked at was the finches, the birds, and he was in the Galapagos Islands, so that was their environment. Let's look at what natural selection is. Natural selection is going to be where organisms can better adapt to their environment to where they can survive and produce more offspring. This is the idea that Charles Darwin came up with, and it is now believed to be the main process that brings about change in organisms. The favorable traits that come about through natural selection become more common over the longer periods of time. For example, the giraffes. Originally, it's believed that giraffes had shorter necks than they do now, And because that is a trait that helps them survive by being able to get the leaves off of the trees, that trait has been brought through, and it is something that you now see commonly in giraffes. We're going to look at a specific example using two different colors of beetles. We're going to have a green beetle and we're going to have brown beetles. And let's say that there was a drought. There is a year or a season where there's not a lot of rain, and so all of the green vegetation dies, which causes the green beetles to not have anywhere that they can go and hide. They are more susceptible to being eaten by predators. Then you also have the brown beetles who are able to camouflage themselves with the dirt. Because of this, the green beetles are going to die out. The brown beetles are going to survive. That is an example of natural selection where you're going to see one of the variations of the population dying out and another one being able to survive because of natural selection. Now we're going to look at where natural selection came from. Charles Darwin got on a ship called the HMS Beagle in the year of 1831, and he traveled to the Galapagos Islands. While he was in the Galapagos Islands, he studied a variety of finches. There were over 13 different species of birds that were all finches, and they had a common ancestor. But over the years, these finches had developed different types of beaks to be able to find food in their specific surroundings. In the Galapagos Islands, there are different trees, there are different environments. Some of them have like hills, some of them have nuts, some of them are very sandy. And so the finches that he studied on each of the islands had adapted to their specific environment. So he took the time to look at the way that each bird had developed a specific beak to be able to find food, no matter if it was seeds or insects, based on where they were living. And then when he returned to England, he devoted his time to trying to figure out why each of the birds' beaks varied from place to place. In 1858, Charles Darwin revealed his theory of evolution of natural selection to say that animals adapt to their environment to survive. And it was after that that he published his book titled On the Origin of Species, and that was a book that a lot of people did not believe when he first wrote it. And then after his life was over, a lot of people have gone back and they've looked at it and they started believing that what he actually found could be true. We can also look at the beaks of other birds to see how they are beneficial. If a bird has a cone-shaped bill, that would be used for cracking seeds. And then if you see a bird that has got a thin, slender, pointed beak, it would be used to pick insects through bark and twigs. If you've ever seen a woodpecker, it has got a very strong beak used for pecking holes in a tree, and then it gets insects out of it. You can also see some birds that have a hook-shaped beak. If you see a bird that's got the hook-shaped beak, you can know that it is a meat eater. It's used to tear that meat apart. And then ducks have a beak that is used to strain plants. It gets the seeds and plants, meat, things like that out of the water. There are lots of other examples of natural selection. We're just going to look at three. The first one that we're going to look at would be deer mice. There are a lot of different colors of mice, but in Nebraska there are two that had moved around the sandhills, and they changed colors from a darker color to a lighter color of brown to hide from their predators. You can see here starting at the top that this one is a lighter color. This is what they started out looking like, and then because the sand was a darker color, over time they adapted to the colors, and so they ended up turning into a darker color to adapt to their surroundings. Another example would be lizards, and they adapt with their legs over time. Different lizards have different lengths of legs to be able to reach their food. If a lizard has short legs, and some actually don't even have any legs at all, like a salamander, the length of their legs determines where they need to reach their food at. If they have longer legs, then they're going to need to reach higher up or be able to climb to reach their food. And like worms, they don't have to climb. They can get their food at the ground. And then the last one is going to be a peacock. Peacocks that have the bigger and brighter colored feathers and tails are known to mate more often. And if a peacock has a more faint color tail, it's been known that they don't mate as often as the ones that have a brighter colored tail. So the first peacock that we're going to look at is going to have the brighter tail. This peacock right here has got the bright colors, and so it would mate more often. And then this peacock has a more faint color, and it would not mate as often. Next, we're going to look at artificial selection. When we look at something that is artificial, it is made by humans. It's not natural. Artificial selection is also known as selective breeding, and this is the process where humans can choose a plant or an animal, and they take two plants or animals and they sexually reproduce the plants or animals to come up with a desired offspring. There are specific traits that humans choose in the plant or the animal breed that they want to acquire from each individual breed. For example, if there are two plant species that one may have a certain height and another may have a disease resistance, and they want those two traits, they're going to take those two plants and they're going to breed them together to come up with a new plant. One example would be mixing a Labrador Retriever with a Poodle, and they came up with a Labradoodle. Another change that we've seen over time with artificial selection is chickens. If you look back to 1957, chickens were rather thin. But over time, they have only bred the thicker chickens, and so over time, the chickens have become thicker and thicker, leading to larger chickens up until this time. With artificial selection, humans are able to select seeds from the better produce. So from 1645, watermelons have evolved from not so much meat to having the red meat, the sweeter meat, because they have selected the seeds from the better looking produce so that we can now have red watermelons that are now sweet. Looking at this picture, if you look at the top, you'll see what corn originally looked like. It did not have kernels going all the way around. It was actually one thin strand, and over time they have been able to breed it to where we can now have an entire cob of corn, and it is now sweet and sugary. Originally, corn did not have as much kernels as it does now, and they have bred it over time to where we now have the corn that we have today. So as we're finishing up, I want to just go back and review with you the difference between natural selection and artificial selection. With natural selection, nature is going to decide who lives and who dies. It doesn't matter if it's plants or animals. Nature is going to decide what plants and animals survive. And artificial selection, humans are going to decide who dies out and who survives. There's a difference when nature chooses what's going to survive versus when humans choose what's going to survive. The cougar on the left has sharp teeth, and the cougar on the right has dull teeth. So if we were going to allow nature to choose which of the two cougars is going to survive, which one do you think would be allowed to survive? When nature is allowed to select the survival, that's natural selection. Because nature is choosing, the cougar that has the sharper teeth would be able to survive because it would be able to fight off the predators more. But when humans are choosing which one's going to survive, humans are more likely to look at which one is cute versus which one is not so cute. In closing, I want to do a comparison between natural selection and artificial selection. Both of these are going to have traits inherited from the parents. It's going to result in a change in the genetic traits of the species, and changes can occur over many generations. Only in natural selection is the process going to occur naturally without any human interference. In natural selection, the species has a chance for survival. It is definitely the survival of the fittest, like the cougar with the sharp teeth, and that would be animals in the wild. For artificial selection, you would have a desired trait, something that you really want in a specific plant or an animal. The acquired traits don't always enhance the survival of the species. You may have, like in bulldogs, they're going to have certain allergies. And an example would be specific dogs or livestock or crops that you want in agriculture. As we close, I just want you guys to know that I miss you. I would much rather be teaching you face to face, and I hope that you're all doing well. And once all this is over, I want you to come back and see me. And I will see you soon.